In this video, I'm going to be talking about two types of leadership style: transactional leadership and transformational leadership. And these are two fundamental leadership styles that you should be aware of, because many of you will be at the stage in your careers where you are starting to become leaders, you are starting to get promoted to more senior positions, and you need to define the kind of leader that you are going to be for your team. Now, of course, there are many different leadership styles, but ultimately many of them can be broken down into these two base concepts of whether they are ultimately transactional by nature or transformational by nature. Now, we're going to be producing lots of different videos on leadership, on management, etc. over the coming weeks. So if you would like to see more of these videos, then do please like and subscribe at the bottom of your screen to make sure that you are always getting the latest videos. We're going to be publishing them fairly regularly, and there's going to be lots of important information for you for improving your own style, your own approach, but also just generally interesting information that you may be able to apply in your workplace. So, what do we mean by transactional leadership and transformational leadership? What ultimately is the difference between the two? Well, the fundamental distinction here is that transactional leadership generally is reactive. The leader is relying on existing structures, they're relying on more formal processes, and ultimately they're relying on the subordinates abiding and complying with what the leader is saying. Here, the leader is perhaps more interchangeable, because they are just holding a certain position, a certain leadership position. They could leave that position, someone else could come in and occupy that role. They are a more traditional leader within a corporate structure, and they're relying on more traditional methods of rewarding, traditional methods of punishing, traditional methods for engaging with employees, etc. Whereas a transformational leader is a bit different. A transformational leader is proactive. A transformational leader will differ from person to person. It's not as interchangeable as perhaps a transactional leader is. The transformational leader builds more of a aura around the personality that they have. So think about very famous leaders in politics, etc. So think of positive leaders such as Martin Luther King. Now, he himself was very influential. It was very, very risky what he was doing. A lot of people were against him, but he got millions of people to march with him, to listen to him, to follow him. And it was because of him. Even though what he was trying to achieve was good, there were people before him that were trying to achieve the same sorts of things. But people didn't follow them. They followed him, though, because of who he was. And it can also work in a negative sense as well. So when we think about horrible leaders of the past, if you think about Adolf Hitler's and people like that, now, they were very, very influential. Even though what they wanted to achieve and what they were doing was horrible, they still got millions of people, ordinary people, to follow them down this horrible path because they were so inspiring as individuals. In a sense, they are building a vision, an approach, and they have the ability to take people along with them. So those are the two big distinctions between transactional and transformational leadership. One is more traditional, it's relying on pre-existing systems, and the other is to do with the leader's personality themselves. So let's take a closer look at some of the key differences between the two and examples of these differences. So, for example, A transactional leader will have far more traditional methods of reward and punishment. If you achieve a certain target by a certain time, you are going to get a bonus. If you do not do that, you'll get a written warning or a verbal warning or something like that. And it's the same for everyone. Regardless of the ability of everyone in the team or the department, they all get very standardized, objective, boilerplate feedback and reward, etc. Whereas a transformational leader will understand that all the employees are different. They all have different wants, they all have different needs, they're all in different situations in their professional and personal life, they all have different levels of emotion, etc. And the transformational leader will do more to seek out those individuals and to understand what truly makes each individual tick, what will motivate them, what will demotivate them, and tailors their feedback, tailors their motivation based on the individual wants and needs of the people that they are leading. And a transactional leader will often exchange effort for reward. So this is where the term transactional comes into it. A transactional leader essentially views an employee of someone that is exchanging their effort, exchanging their time in exchange for reward. Their time is what they are offering, and the pay that you are giving them is what they are receiving in return. It's a transaction of effort. Whereas a transformational leader, the motivation will be based on the appreciation of that leader themselves. They want to be seen as someone who is a productive employee in the eyes of that leader. They want to be seen as someone that leader likes, that leader appreciates. So in a sense, they're trying to just demonstrate that they're willing to follow that leader. So the motivation is different here. It's not just based off of financial or monetary rewards. It's about wanting to impress that leader because they respect them so much, because they admire them. A transactional leader will often be reactive to issues as well. And so what I mean by being reactive to issues is rather than preempt, which is what a transformational leader would do, rather than preempt that perhaps we're going to have issues with motivation with that employee because of something's happened in their life or something like that, they'll just react to issues as and when they arise. They're not forward thinking, they're not planning ahead. Oh, we went over budget, let's deal with that now that we've gone over budget. Whereas a transformational leader will always be looking for potential issues that could happen in the future, looking for the fact that they may go over budget and taking action in advance. So they're thinking more big picture, they're thinking more holistically, they're not focusing on the here and now. With regards to setting targets, what a transactional leader will do is focus very much on the tasks themselves. They'll set goals, they'll set objectives for their staff. We need to get X amount in sales by a certain time. Whereas a transformational leader will inspire employees to create solutions, or they'll inspire employees to think for themselves. So rather than just set very clear tasks and very clear goals, they might set a target of improving productivity over the next year. And that's pretty much it. Improving productivity, improving profitability over the next year. They won't say to them, right, you need to do this very specific thing by next week, this very specific thing by next month, and if you do all that and you do it as I say, then we will improve productivity and profitability. They give the power, they empower their employees to come up with the solutions themselves, to think for themselves, to take ownership of a certain objective, a certain task, and do it their own way. So in the long run, this can be much more beneficial for the employee, because the employee that works under the transactional leader will only ever just learn how to be more efficient at doing the very specific tasks that they are given. where as an employee under a transformational leader will learn lots of new skills as well. They'll learn how to become effective leaders themselves. They'll learn how to problem solve, etc. Now, the effectiveness of each of these different types of leader also depends as well on different things. So for a transformational leader to be effective, you need to have a very strong bond between the employee and the employer, because you're ultimately relying on that relationship to be successful. If the employee doesn't respect the leader that is using a transformational leadership style, then they're just not going to do what they say. They're going to walk all over them, because the transformational leader is constantly doing things for their employees. They're constantly trying to motivate them to do their own work, etc., and find their own way of doing things. So if the employee smells that and senses that, but at the same time doesn't respect the transformational leader, they're just going to walk all over them and saying, yep, I'll have a go at doing that, and then find an excuse for why they didn't do it, and the transformational leader will understand what they're saying, etc. So you need a lot of mutual respect for a transformational leadership to work. Whereas the transactional leader, where you are relying on more existing systems and procedures and structures in place, the effectiveness will ultimately depend just purely on the power of that leader. If that leader has a lot of power within the organization, that they have the power to really interrupt your job if you annoy them, if they have the power to say fire you or anything like that if you misbehave, then that will ensure an effective transactional relationship, because they're using traditional methods of reward and punishment. But if they don't have any actual power, it's just a figurehead position or a kind of supervisory in name only position, then they won't have any real motivation to do what that leader says, because they know the leader can't actually reward them, they can't actually punish them. All they are is some leader that barks orders at them all the time, but there's no actual punishment if they don't follow the orders. So for a transactional leadership relationship to be effective, the leader has to have legitimate power within the organization. And finally, with regard to managing change within an organization, what the reactional transactional leader will do is they'll manage that change just using data and technical knowledge. This is the right thing to do, so we're doing it, and use traditional textbook methods of change management. Whereas a transformational leader will get all the employees involved, get them bought into the change. So that's all well and good. We've discussed some of the various different distinctions and differences between transactional and transformational leaders, but what does it actually mean? What does it actually look like? Well, I'm going to use the example now of Joe and Bob. And Joe and Bob work for an organization that produces dolls. Joe manages Bob, and Bob in turn manages a team. And Joe takes Bob out to lunch and says to him that we're getting towards Christmas, there's going to be a lot of dolls that are going to be purchased, and in order to meet this upturn in sales, we're going to need to improve productivity over the next 12 weeks. So, Bob, what I would like you to do is find a way to improve productivity over the next 12 weeks. So that's the task that has been given to Bob by Joe. So what Bob then does is takes that on board, right, I need to increase productivity over the next 12 weeks. He goes back to the office, meets with his team, and he says, right guys, we've got to improve productivity over the next 12 weeks. So what we're going to do is meet this particular target I'm setting now. We're going to improve productivity by 15%. And all of you need to improve your productivity by 15%. Those of you who do, I'm going to give a substantial bonus to. Those of you who fail to meet that target, that 15% improvement in productivity, are not going to get a bonus. And actually, those of you that do not improve productivity at all over the next 12 weeks, you're potentially not going to have your contracts renewed for the next year. So Bob gives them the tasks, they go off and do it. So what is being demonstrated here? Well, we can see that both transformational leadership and transactional leadership are in play. For starters, let's take the relationship between Joe and Bob. Joe came to Bob and said that I think that sales are going to increase over the next 12 weeks and we need to improve productivity to make sure we can meet all those sales. So for starters, Joe is being proactive here. He's dealing with issues preemptively. He's realizing that sales are going to increase in the next 12 weeks, and so he's taking action now to improve productivity. And what he's then done is he has gone to Bob and told him what he wants. He says that sales are going to increase. We need to increase productivity. Can you increase productivity? So he's gone to Bob and inspired him to find a solution. Now, the success of this will depend on the admiration that Bob may have for Joe as a leader and also the bond that is shared between them. So far, it looks like the relationship is pretty good. Bob has taken it on board. He has gone back to his team and set targets to achieve that productivity increase. But what about Bob? Was he a transformational or a transactional leader? Well, what he did was he went to his team, he didn't consult them, he just went to them and said, right, you will need to improve productivity by 15%. So he was setting them very clear goals and objectives. He wasn't asking them to contribute to the discussion or to contribute to the formulation of the target. He was just giving them a goal. He then offered bonuses to anyone who met the target. So that was an effort for reward, and was also using very traditional methods of reward and punishment. If you meet your target, you get a bonus. If you fail to achieve the level of increase that is expected, you won't get rewarded. In fact, if you don't show any improvement whatsoever, you may not have your contract renewed. So that is an illustration, very simple, very straightforward, but nevertheless it's an illustration of the difference in approach. What Bob would need to do if he wanted to be more like Joe and to provide a transformational leadership style and demonstrate a transformational leadership style was he would do something similar. He would meet with all his various different staff. He would set targets for each of them based on their individual abilities and where they were. For example, someone that's worked at the doll factory for 10 years and has been making dolls every day for 10 years, probably going to find it easier to increase their productivity than someone that is very new and is still learning the ropes. They're already slower than everyone else, and now expecting them to increase and meet a 15% productivity increase, it would be a 15% increase for someone that was experienced, is going to be almost impossible for them. So here Bob has not tailored his feedback, he's not tailored it to the specific individuals. So there you can see the differences in these approaches in action and how it would look when someone that is a transformational leader is providing instructions versus when someone who is a transactional leader is providing instructions. And of course, there is no right or wrong approach here. Both are meritable leadership styles. For example, transformational leadership is very good at developing and improving employees. It's very effective in environments where you have a lot of risk-taking and there is a demand for innovation, whereas a transactional leader is very effective in a much more disciplined environment. So, for example, if you were in the military or if it was a particular task that required a lot of physical action and repetitive processes rather than trying to do anything new or trying to do anything different. For example, like on an assembly line where there is a set task and it needs to be done in a set way. So it does depend on the situation as much as it does on the individuals. Neither is a right or wrong approach. Certain ones work better in different situations. And on that note, the next video in this series on leadership styles is going to be on situational leadership. This is where a leader will tailor their approach to how they interact, how they treat their staff, and how they set targets based on the situation rather than always being a more transformational leader versus a transactional leader. So if you would like to watch that, then do stay tuned. Click the like and subscribe button, and I hope to see you then.